Coming up next on Tech News Weekly, it's me, Jason Howell, my co-host Mikah Sargent, and we got a really good show for you, starting with Farhad Manjoo from the New York Times writing about their own Facebook regrets. You know, it's okay to change over time, change our opinion of companies like Facebook, and that's what Farhad talks all about. Also, Crist from CNET talks about the murky waters of surveillance video, things like Ring video being shared with police without a warrant. Right? We dive into that, as well as I detail the world of data aggregation in today's heavily computer-driven vehicles. And then Mikah takes a look at the latest effort to make net neutrality stick once and for all. All that more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 245, recorded Thursday, July 28th, 2022. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Drata. Security professionals are undergoing the tedious and arduous task of manually collecting evidence. With Drata, say goodbye to the days of manual evidence collection and hello to automation, all done at Drata speed. Visit drata.com/twit to get a demo and 10% off implementation.
And by Barracuda. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them every day. Phishing, conversation hacking, ransomware, plus 10 more tricks cybercriminals use to steal money from your company or your personal information from your employees and customers. Get your free ebook at barracuda.com/TNW.
And by Collide. You can meet your security goals and pass your audit without compromising on privacy. Visit collide.com/TNW to find out how. If you follow that link, they'll hook you up with a goodie bag, including a t-shirt, by the way, just for activating a free trial.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where every week we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I am one of your hosts, Mikah Sargent.
And I'm the other guy, Jason Howell. Good to see you, Mikah.
Good to see you too, Jason. We were talking a little bit about adding some splashes of color, a little pop to your setup. But you know what? I kind of like the corner. It's you. It works.
It is now. Like what? 2 years later, this corner is me.
Exactly.
Nobody puts Jason in the corner. Nobody except Jason.
Except you.
That's what I chose. All right, let's jump in. And actually, this topic is very interesting to me this week of all weeks because for whatever reason, I can't even tell you why, I signed up again for Facebook after 4 years of being away. I'm not even entirely sure why I did that. I started missing people, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna see what's changed in 4 years. Well, here we are, kind of talking about how things have changed for Facebook over the years, and not just in the last 4 years, but since its inception, right? Years and years ago when Facebook was just, first coming out and everybody was like, what is this social media thing, this evolution of MySpace? Facebook seemed like this really great way of keeping in touch with people. And as we know, over time, things have kind of shifted around. Some people still stand by, Facebook the way they always have. Other people see Facebook as having changed a whole lot and actually having changed everything surrounding it as well. One of those folks is Farhad Manjoo, who wrote about being wrong about Facebook for the New York Times, actually in a series called I Was Wrong About ... So Farhad joins us now to talk about the reasons why, as well as kind of the importance of this kind of reflection. Welcome to the show, Farhad.
Hey, good to be here. You might be the only one to join Facebook recently.
That's what I'm wondering. And I don't know exactly where it came from, but I was like, I'm just going to see what goes on. I mean, part of it was kind of like an experimentation too, because I've had enough space from it to actually be able to see it with fresh eyes and go, okay, is there still anything here that I should be missing? And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. But let's talk a little bit about your experience because early on, and especially you write about this in this piece, you felt maybe an optimism about Facebook. And I think a lot of us did back in the beginning, especially. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take you back even earlier to the time of like the first kind of prominent social network, which was Friendster. And I think that one thing that was kind of mind-blowing about it was like before social networks, you really didn't have a way to kind of connect to other real people on the internet. Like you maybe had some people's email addresses and stuff, but it was a lot of strangers online. And then with social networks, with Friendster, then MySpace, and then Facebook really kind of took it to the mainstream. You could find real people who were long lost friends, relatives, people you went to school with, and you could connect with them. And that sounds totally like humdrum today, but at the time it was just mind blowing. Like the internet like achieved this new purpose, and I think a lot of people, myself included, were super excited about it.
Yeah, I know I was as well. It really seemed like a window. You know what it seemed to me at the time? It seemed like, you know what? I'm not sure if I have a whole lot of interest of going back to high school for like my 20th year anniversary, but if I can follow everybody that I care about, marginally or a lot or whatever over the years through this tool called Facebook, that seems like the right way to go. So I was pretty optimistic about it too. I think most of us were at the time. It seemed like a pretty monumental thing. When did you start to kind of realize that perhaps your thoughts about Facebook, your feelings about Facebook were shifting?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I was super optimistic about it until about 2011, 2012, sort of after the, it was really hailed. Facebook and Twitter and other social networks were really hailed for their effect in the Arab Spring. And, people said that they had this ability to get democratic movements, to give people a voice. And it seemed like that was happening, in that movement. But I think steadily after that, we've seen kind of in the world just like more and more negative effects. We've seen conspiracy theories. The anti-vax movement has been huge on Facebook. The kind of just everything we think of as like the post-truth era in terms of, election fraud, conspiracy theories and health conspiracy theories have just found a real home on Facebook. Not to mention kind of like beyond the United States, Facebook has been accused of, being a key part of the an ethnic cleansing in Myanmar, just kind of lots of other kind of really bad things in the world that were perpetuated by Facebook. And it's really, I think, a sign of a company and a society not being able to handle just explosive growth and the effects of its technology becoming ubiquitous.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, what is it about Facebook as a network that is, I hate to say welcoming, but I guess to some degree kind of allows for and cultivates that kind of fringy, the fringy growth, the things that you're talking about, these things that reside on the fringe but are able and allowed to kind of, become even larger than maybe they are and impact so many more people. What is it about Facebook that makes that more possible there versus other? Or is this just a commentary on social media in general?
I mean, in some sense, it is a commentary on social media in general. You see, a lot of bad stuff on Twitter also, for example. But I think what drives Facebook and what has made it so successful is the news feed. And the news feed on Facebook is, it's algorithmic. It was one of the first, I think newsfeed basically was the first kind of daily feed that gave you a summary of what people, in your network were saying. And it really works according to outrage, essentially. The things that are, more outrageous, more compelling, content that may not be true, but like really gets a lot of clicks, that does really well on Facebook. And that is something that, has fed into their business. It's why they've been so successful. It's why they've gotten so many users, but it's also, and why they have so many ads, but it's also why, just a lot of low quality content takes off on Facebook.
Yeah, indeed. it's easy from our perspective now to look back and we can see the effects and the impact that this has had over a number of years and go, okay, obviously, and this is kind of part of the point of your piece is looking backwards and saying, all right, I was wrong. There was a time that I was optimistic. Now I see the impacts of this, and it's easy to look at that and kind of like judge ourselves or say, we should have known better. We should have seen better, but. I mean, how could we have effectively been more critical in our thinking of Facebook, even prior to the Arab Spring that you mentioned? Like, it's hard to see these things when you're especially in the beginnings of all this.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to kind of around 2008, 2009, when Facebook really took off, started getting hundreds of millions of users. And, everyone kind of loved it. Like politicians used it. The Obama campaign, made Facebook kind of a key part of its get out the vote effort. And it really worked for them. And, if you think back at that time, the kind of, evil companies in the corporate world were on Wall Street, and Silicon Valley was just really thought of as like the future, the kind of, like perhaps a less evil, a more ethically, defensible part of corporate America. And I think that vibe changed over time as the companies got bigger and kind of started behaving more like normal companies. I think the other thing that had a big effect was mobile phones. I think, before everyone had a smartphone, Facebook, its kind of limits of it was limited to basically you could use it when you were at your computer, and people weren't at their computers all day. When we got phones, like we were just. It allowed Facebook and other social networks to be with us and sort of play a role in our lives, with cameras, with kind of constant notifications, just every moment of your life. And I think that really kind of gave it a new prominence in our lives, probably a prominence that we shouldn't have kind of just jumped into.
Yeah, indeed. I wanted to ask you if you could go back in time and rewrite kind of your feelings on Facebook, how you do that differently. But I think the better question is, knowing where you're at now, how does this impact how you write about things in the moment, in the current view of society, and maybe the things that are just at the beginning stages and how you look forward and everything? Has this had an impact on that?
Yeah, I mean, I generally feel like the big lesson I took away from Facebook, from the Facebook era, is that as a society, as kind of users of technology, we should just go a lot slower. I feel like I used to be, and I still am, an early adopter, but I used to kind of be like proudly an early adopter, think that that's kind of the best way to live, to kind of be on the cutting edge. But I think it's perfectly defensible to just wait to see, before buying an autonomous car, just wait to see how it works in the real world before like everyone jumps into VR or augmented reality. I hope that people will see and, kind of watch its effects on the world, not just regular people, but like regulators, politicians, kind of just go more slowly with adopting technology. I think that that would probably be very helpful to how to prevent some of the kind of harms we've seen from Facebook.
Yeah, I suppose the challenge there is knowing when you've waited long enough. Like, what is that long enough point? And we never really know. At some point, we're stepping off a ledge and saying, okay, now is a good time. Maybe that wasn't a good time,
Right. No, it's always hard to kind of pick the moment. And you don't know exactly when a technology is going to change. I mean, especially things that are, social technologies or internet services, they change as more people use them, and they kind of get a different, a different vibe, a different effect on the world. And so that's really hard to predict.
I think one thing that I really appreciate about this series and about what you wrote, Farhad, is that I think especially in this current era where people have such strong beliefs and it's really hard to look outside of our beliefs, or we are dead set that we are right because X, Y, and Z, I feel like it's really important, and I believe that your article illustrates this, the whole series does. It's important to take a look back at how we have believed, the things that we've held as sacred, held as true, and actually, be open to the possibility that maybe we were wrong, or maybe that seemed right at the time, but things have changed, and it's okay to change our view on something like this. Do you think journalists and people in general do this enough? Or maybe we focus this on journalism because I think this is kind of the point of what this whole series is all about. All of the writers kind of taking a look at their previous work and saying, okay, I was wrong about this. This should probably happen more all across the board outside of like a specific series, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the response from this has definitely gotten me thinking about other times I was wrong, and like
Sure.
I think they're not hard to identify for all of us. But yeah, I mean, it's rare in media, in life, for people to kind of be so confessional about times they were wrong, and I think it is healthy. Like, we got a really good response to the series, I think, because it is unusual, and I think it would be a good thing if more people in media and in life just kind of did some version of this kind of exercise.
I completely agree, and I appreciate that you wrote this, and I appreciate that all of your colleagues wrote their pieces as well. I think it's a really great, it sets a really good example for folks to be okay with the fact that you might not always be right, and that's all right, because we're all human, right, at the end of the day. Farhad Manjoo writes for the New York Times, and what can I say? It's a total honor and a pleasure to get you on the show today. Thank you so much for carving time with us today.
Thanks. It's been great. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. We'll talk with you soon, Farhad.
All right, talk later.
Alrighty. Coming up, Amazon's Ring isn't the only company that's sharing video with police and without a warrant. Yes, Google's getting in on that game too. We've got an interview with Crist from CNET about that. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Drata. Is your organization finding it difficult to achieve continuous compliance? You're quickly growing, right? You're scaling fast. You got to keep that continuous compliance throughout. Is manual evidence collection actually slowing your team down? Well, as G2's highest rated cloud compliance software, Drata streamlines your SOC 2, your ISO 27001, your PCI DSS, GDPR, HIPAA, and other compliance frameworks. It also provides 24-hour continuous control monitoring so you can focus on scaling securely. With a suite of more than 75 integrations, Drata easily integrates with your tech stack through applications that you're using right in the cloud: AWS, Azure, GitHub, Okta, Cloudflare. Countless security professionals from companies like Lemonade, Notion, Bamboo HR, they're all sharing how crucial it's been to have Drata as their trusted partner in the compliance process, Drata in their corner. Their deep native integrations provide instant visibility into a security program and continuous monitoring to ensure compliance is always met. Drata allows companies to see all of their controls and then easily map them to compliance frameworks to gain immediate insight into framework overlap. Companies can actually start building a solid security posture from day one with Drata, so you can achieve and maintain compliance as your business scales, and expand the security assurance efforts using the Drata platform. Drata's automated dynamic policy templates support companies new to compliance and help alleviate hours of manual labor. They have an integrated security awareness training program and automated reminders as well that ensure smooth employee onboarding. And they are the only player in the industry to build on a private database architecture from day one. And that really means your data can never be accessed by anyone outside your organization. All customers receive a team of compliance experts, so you'd get that too, including a designated customer success manager, very helpful. And in addition, they have a team of former auditors who have conducted more than 500 audits. They're available for support and counsel. That is invaluable. Your success is actually their success as well. So you've got consistent meeting cadence to keep you on track and ensure that there are no surprises or barriers. Plus, your pre-audit calls ensure that you're actually set up for success when your audits begin. Drata is personally backed by SVCI, a syndicate of CISO and CISO angel investors from some of the world's most influential companies. So say goodbye to manual evidence collection. Say hello to automated compliance by visiting drata.com/twit. And I'll spell it out. That's DRATA, Drata.com/twit. drata.com/twit, bringing automation to compliance at Drata speed. And we thank Drata for their support of Tech News Weekly. All right, so tell me what Google is doing here with their video. They're sharing it, and I don't like that.
Yeah, for sure. We will get to that. This is kind of a larger conversation about everything to do with sharing video from our internet-connected cameras. Joining us to talk about this is CNET's Rye Crist. Welcome back to the show, Rye.
Hey, good to be back. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So let's start by talking about the instances just this year. I mean, we know about Ring, and they've been in the news a lot for sharing video with law enforcement. But tell us about the instances this year where Ring handed over footage to police, because they actually shared how many times they did it. And I'm curious, is it true that sometimes this didn't involve a warrant?
Yeah, that's the apparent case of what's going on here. In response to questioning from the Senate, from Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, Amazon released some information on its disclosure practices around law enforcement requests for footage, and that included the information that 11 times so far in 2022, Amazon and Ring had disclosed user footage to the police without warrants necessarily. We don't have all the details, but that's what it sounds like. And also without the users necessarily being consented. So the reason for that Ring says is that these were emergency situations. These were life and death type situations involving things like attempted murder, kidnapping, self-harm, things like that. And the law from 1986 really is the privacy law that these companies are leaning on, but it gives them the latitude to transfer footage if they honestly in good faith believe that there is a situation like that. So Ring does have a policy of responding to those requests. They have a 2-page form that officers can fill out, has to explain why they couldn't get a warrant and who's in danger and all that. And then when Ring's lawyers think that that's reasonable and that request is legitimate, they will transfer the footage if they need to try and save someone's life or prevent an emergency from happening. They say that they've done that 11 times this year, and that was the big news that broke earlier this month when Ring disclosed that. But what's also happening is we took a look at the rest of the industry and some of the other major players when it comes to home cameras and video doorbells, and Google also has a clause in their terms of service that allows for this sort of emergency sharing of video footage. So Google tells us that it will comply with those requests, including warrantless requests in emergency situations. But it's important to note that Google also tells us that they have never done so to date, that situation has never happened where they have felt that they needed to transfer footage without a warrant. Now, the context there is that Ring sells a lot more video doorbells and a lot more home camera products than Google and a lot of other names in the industry combined, which is a good point that Blake Kozak on Twitter brought up. So that context is important because Ring does sell an enormous amount of cameras. There are a lot more opportunities for these kinds of emergency situations, you could argue. But the interesting thing, just to think, looking back at Ring and all the transparency reports that they put out, and they have reports from previous years that detail the times that police have tried to get footage from them when they've served them with a warrant, a subpoena, court order. And those transparency reports don't say anything about emergency requests that skirt the warrant process altogether, that aren't involving that legal process. So there's some questions about transparency here.
Yeah, this is the first year then that they've started actually saying this specifically is the category where we've handed it over in cases without a warrant. But you're saying that in years past, they just had a number of requests that the police had, but they didn't sort of delineate between the two. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's the case. The transparency report from 2020 that Ring put out, for instance, it has information on the warrants they received, the number of subpoenas, court orders, foreign requests, requests that pertain to national security that are authorized under FISA, but nothing in that transparency report about emergency requests that are going through this 2-page form instead of going through a judge. And so given Ring's extensive history of police partnerships, which is, it dwarfs what any other competitor is doing, there's nothing else like that. there are a lot of concerns here, I think, about the potential police abuse that could come with a process that lets police look at your footage, maybe your audio, any other home data is subject to these same sort of legal ramifications, and lets them do that without, the independent oversight of a judge or someone else signing off on it, or the user even knowing that it's happened.
Now, let's go back in the history. Ring and Amazon has kind of an ongoing storied history with law enforcement. Could you remind the listeners, if they don't know, or tell the listeners, if this is their first time, learning about it, about the partnerships that Ring was reported to have had in the past with law enforcement that kind of put this company in the spotlight for these specific privacy concerns?
Sure. It's been a very active part of Ring's growth strategy over the last several years to partner with police organizations, to have a lot of outreach to police organizations and various law enforcement groups. There have been a lot of neighborhood efforts to get Ring cameras into neighborhoods that police might want better coverage of and more people that they can ask for footage. Police are allowed to ask Ring users for their footage. It used to be that the police would email users directly if they had someone that was in the vicinity of a crime or on a street where a crime had happened. They could email that customer and ask for footage. Ring changed that policy last year after criticism of people saying that this was facilitating police accessing stuff that they would usually get a warrant for. And Ring changed that so that now these police requests all happen within the Ring Neighbors app. They're public posts that police can make now, and anybody can comment on them. People can look at the history of what the police have asked for in the past, and they can opt out of seeing those requests altogether. But again, Ring's announcement last year of that change didn't mention anything about these emergency requests that would not be showing up and not be trackable in the Neighbors app.
Yeah, and in fact, you kind of covered it a little bit, but could you tell us in your piece, you detail how Ring sort of differentiates or makes a distinction between what are sort of non-urgent ongoing investigations and emergency requests? And so the company internally maybe had been making those, but what qualifies for which kind of thing in this situation?
I mean, it's really up to the discretion of Ring's lawyers, and Ring says that it does have a team of lawyers that are dedicated to this job. This is their sole responsibility at Ring, is to evaluate claims like this, and that might tell you that this, while rare, it's probably more regular than maybe Ring would want to admit. But they will evaluate the merits of those police claims of an emergency. They will ask the police for whatever pertinent info the police can share and ask them why they couldn't get a warrant in a timely fashion. And if it's the situation in Ring's estimation that waiting for a warrant to be granted or served would prevent them from saving someone's life potentially, Ring reserves the right, and Google does as well, to share that footage in those instances. And it's just really up to them to make that determination.
And how did you find out about Google and its Nest platform making the decision to hand over footage in these kinds of instances? Was this something that you had to reach out to the company to discover? Was this something you just found? How did you come about knowing that Google also participated, so to speak, in this behavior of handing over footage in emergency situations?
Yeah, after Ring's disclosure of the 11 emergency shares so far this year, we reached out to everybody else in the industry, all the other companies, and just asked them, do you have a policy like this? What's your policy when it comes to police interest in user data? And so it's got that conversation started with all those companies. And it was very interesting to see the different levels of how companies are handling this issue. Because again, it really is up to them. It's a sort of philosophical question for them to answer. Do you give police this access in emergency situations? And maybe save a life? There is the possibility that's a thing that could happen. On the other hand, are you creating the slippery slope? Google, told us about their policy, and it's in their terms of service. It's on a page specifically about government requests for user info. They have a good deal of information on that page, but it doesn't really make it clear that this is including warrantless requests for data, and that's what Google is now confirming. And other companies have different policies, though. It's worth noting that Apple, which processes a lot of user video through its HomeKit secure video HomeKit protocols, that requires end-to-end encryption, which prevents Apple from accessing or sharing that footage without the user's consent or the key that the user has with their device. So they can't share footage with the police at all, they say. Other manufacturers like Arlo and Wise, they tell us that they will share with the police if they're served with a warrant, but they won't do so in these emergency situations without one. They'll tell the police to get a warrant in that case.
Okay, so what you're just to clarify for our listeners, what you're saying is, in the case of Arlo, in the case of Wise, the companies are saying that the police come to them and say, "There's an emergency situation happening. Can you please show us the video of Ned Flanders' house from the Wise camera he has set up above his door?" And they will say no unless you have a warrant. But Amazon's Ring would say yes. Our lawyers say we can.
Basically, yes. Amazon's Ring would say that we will consider that. We'll look at the merits of your request and grant it if we think it's valid.
Okay, understood. Now, my last question for you, and I think kind of the most important thing, you, of course, cover lots of smart home technology and are probably very familiar with privacy policies from these different companies and terms and conditions. What advice would you give our listeners on how they might go and find and educate themselves on how their smart home tech, in particular their cameras, are or are not handing over footage, or are what their policies are essentially surrounding these situations? Is this a situation where you do have to be a press person and reach out directly to a company, or is this stuff somewhere in the terms and conditions and privacy policies?
It's a great question. And I think the unfortunate truth is that too often when we see these types of privacy questions come up, it does take the press or, in the case of Ring's disclosure, a U.S. senator to ask questions before the answers that we're looking for are available. Information about these policies is in the privacy policies of these companies. A lot of them have specific documents about how they handle police requests, like Google does. Ring has similar documents. But again, a lot of the fine print in those documents don't make it clear that this involves situations where the police wouldn't have a warrant or a court order. And so the specifics like that, those documents are always going to be written to the benefit of the company and not to the benefit of the consumer. They're going to be written in a way that protects the company's interests. And so that's where it's a problem for consumers who want to know in good faith what the practices of their smart home products are. They're not going to necessarily find clear answers in the fine print. What I would tell people, though, is that end-to-end encryption is I think, going to become a more important standard in the video space for people that are especially privacy conscious, just because it does sever that ability to have the footage be shared by the company to the police. So that's one thing I would say. You can look for that feature, and that's going to be a very strong way to protect your footage from outside access. But even then, it's difficult because there are a lot of ways to describe encryption, and companies will often talk about their levels of encryption as military grade, or it's encryption in transit and at rest, which sounds like end to end, but isn't quite the same thing. So it's very difficult, I think, for consumers to follow. And so it's something that we're going to be, as we evaluate camera products and any really smart home gadget that records the user or gathers sensitive data. It's something that we at CNET are going to take a good look at as we continue to evaluate and recommend products. And we'll do our best to make that as clear as we can.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, definitely then folks can head to cnet.com to keep up with your work there. But is there anywhere else folks can go to follow along with what you're doing?
You can find me on Twitter. Just my name, @Crist. And I apologize for the bad jokes on there, but it's mostly just tech stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Good to talk.
Alrighty, folks, up next, it is Jason Howell's Story of the Week. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. In a recent email trends survey, 43% of respondents said they had been victims of a spear phishing attack, but only 23% said they have dedicated spear phishing protection. So obviously there's a problem here, a problem that needs to be solved. And the question becomes, how are you out there keeping your email secure? Well, Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them every day. Phishing, conversation hacking, ransomware, and 10 more tricks that cybercriminals use to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. And the question is, are you protected against all 13 types? See, email cybercrime is quickly becoming one of the most sophisticated means of attacks. And the problem is that they are incredibly difficult to prevent because you've got so many different people, employees who are clicking on things in emails and who may not know that they are the victim of a spear phishing attempt. Attacks use social engineering, so urgency and fear are at the heart of that to prey on these victims. Social engineering attacks, including spear phishing and business email compromise, cost businesses an average of $130,000 per incident. Yeah, that is the statistic. $130,000 per incident. That's like a whole employee. As demand for COVID-19 tests increased at the start of 2022, Barracuda researchers saw an increase in COVID-19 test-related phishing attacks increase by 521% between October and January. And as public interest rise, for example, in cryptocurrency is one place where that happens, the opportunity for attacks become ripe. As the price of Bitcoin increased by almost 400% between October 2020 and April 2021, Barracuda research found that impersonation attacks grew 192% in the same period. So who knows? This year might feature NFT spear phishing attempts or more vaccine attempts, all sorts of stuff, because these bad actors out there are clever enough to look at the trends and do what they need to do to figure out how to get what they want from a victim. In 2020, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, received 19,369 business email compromise / email account compromise complaints with adjusted losses of more than $1.8 billion. So what do we do about all this? Well, it turns out that securing email at the gateway level, which may have been your answer there, it's not enough anymore. It's still important to leverage gateway security to protect against traditional attacks such as viruses, zero-day ransomware, spam, and other threats, but your gateway is defenseless against these targeted attacks. Protection at the inbox level, including AI and machine learning, that is what you need to detect and stop the most sophisticated threats. And Barracuda has something pretty cool for you. Get a free copy of the Barracuda Report. This is 13 email threat types to know about right now, and you will see how the cyber criminals are getting more and more sophisticated every day. And now you can build the best protection for your business, for your data, and for people with Barracuda. Find out about the 13 email threat types you need to know about and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and most importantly, your reputation. Get your free ebook at barracuda.com/TNW. I'm heading there right now. barracuda.com/TNW. Barracuda, your journey secured. Thank you so much to Barracuda for sponsoring this week's episode of Tech News Weekly. Jason Howell, take it away.
All right. Data collection. Isn't that fun? We're going to talk a little bit about this because, boy, does it impact our lives in so many ways. And now there's, well, I'm thinking like a path, an avenue for data collection that I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time thinking about, and that is vehicles, right? As our vehicles are more, are becoming more and more computer and less just straight up a dumb vehicle, that isn't connected to the internet, let's say. I don't mean dumb because they are actually dumb, but just by comparison, they're not smart devices. And now they're kind of becoming smart devices. So what does that mean? Vehicles, have that computer built in. And as a result, more and more of the vehicle is being operated because and through that computer. And as a result of that, a lot of the things that we do inside of vehicles are logged. They're potentially sent off, communicated to the OEM and beyond. And that's just something that I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time thinking about. And actually, there's an article on the Markup that's all about this. And I thought it was just an interesting read because it really kind of gives a really nice kind of full look at how this actually works behind the scenes and the things that we need to at least understand and hopefully take care of now before we end up in, you know, one of these very familiar places we've been ending up with data collection and data selling and the data marketplace and all this kind of stuff on the back end. And apparently, you know, according to the markup, you know, regulation over how this is happening in the automotive industry is very minimal. So pretty important to look at this now. So just to kind of give a little bit of a quick summary here, what kinds of data? So all sorts of triggers, everything that can happen inside the car can be logged essentially if it's being controlled by the computer. The door unlocking, which seats happen to be occupied, the cabin temperature, you know, when was the ignition button started, how long, you know, things like location, the speed that you're traveling, if and when the brakes are actually applied, what's playing on the entertainment system. Like all of this is just a handful of pieces of data that passes through the computer that is, you know, evolving over time to be so important and so intrinsically roped throughout the vehicles that we're driving through. And I think especially this is probably the case with electric vehicles. You know, as we go into this EV world, they are absolutely, you know, built around these computer systems, and so as a result, you can imagine a lot of data collected there. But what happens to that data, right? So essentially, this data is collected inside of the vehicle as the vehicle is being used, but then that data can actually be sent to vehicle data hubs, and you know, a lot of these vehicles have connected capabilities to the internet, so that data doesn't just stay on the vehicle, it gets sent out. But the OEMs themselves, like, they make vehicles. They're not in the business of data management necessarily. This is kind of like a new avenue for them. So what the markup points out is that, and this is kind of critical to what this is really hinges on as far as privacy and security is concerned, is that this data is then sent out to vehicle data hubs who collect the data and then organize it in a fashion that OEMs can understand. And what that actually means is these hubs then have access to kind of the whole of connected car data, right? Not just from this particular OEM or the vehicles under this OEM, but a lot of them kind of sending to similar hubs to manage, to organize, to interpret, and then send that back to the OEMs in a fashion that they can really do something with or really understand. Not only that, though, they can bundle all that data up and then market it for other uses. So think insurance, think advertising, because of course, mapping, location intelligence, city planning for EVs, all this kind of stuff. Some of that stuff, it's like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. This is really good information, you know, to get in the hands of someone who's making the infrastructure for EV charging or planning, you know, roadways in a city and everything. That stuff could be potentially very useful, but as we've seen with like browsers, you know, over the years, when they say the data is anonymized, it's aggregated, you know, it's not personally identifiable. It's the same thing here. Yes, it's anonymized, and yes, it's aggregated and put into this like big pool for wider analysis. And on its surface, that seems to show that, well, you know, I as a person am not going to be identified in this data, but the markup points out the high risk of violating user privacy as a result. Same that we saw with browsers, right? Multiple streams of data combined together can actually create a sort of fingerprint of a user or a vehicle. And, you know, not only in this case is it just vehicle data. In some cases, some of that data that's collected includes things like personal details, heart rate, driver fatigue, things like that, that when you combine all these things together and the potential of de-anonymizing this stuff, you can see, once again, data, you know, collection and the data marketplace is ripe for the picking for people who have certain reasons to understand what's happening, you know, at the root cause of that data, especially in light of things like, you know, Roe v. Wade, you know, overturning and all the things associated with that is just one example. Markup also points out that location traces themselves, even when those are anonymized, they're highly personal. They're highly identifiable to unique individuals, right? I might have a very specific location trace that I follow 90% of the time. And so if that data is analyzed in a certain way, it can be determined that that person who's doing that location, that's always that person, and you can kind of see where that could possibly go. So anyways, I thought it was just, at the end of the day, like, I don't know how newsy it is necessarily. It's not like current, headline news, but I do think that it's important to think about the different ways that data is being collected on us as users, not just in the smartphones that we have in our pocket, which, by the way, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, man, take all the data that's being collected on the smartphone and then also the information that's collected while we're driving vehicles, and you put that together and you've got a powerful soup. And I don't know, it's important to know what's happening to this stuff. And also, and I think the ultimate point of the markup is that regulation around how this marketplace happens, what happens with this data after it's passed along. It's just really important to protect people, to protect privacy, to protect lives. And also, like, you could think about like the health industry or the health insurance industry suddenly having more access to very highly personal information about us, which of course they want. The insurance companies want as much information as they can so that they can either accept or refuse to accept claims and all that kind of stuff. So it goes in a number of different directions, but that's where my mind's at. What about you, Mikah?
I find it, I always had wondered, because I thought about how I use GPS a lot, but a lot of people don't. Once they've lived in a place for a while, they don't need GPS, so they can drive around and they're just fine. And I always wondered how my GPS on my phone was able to tell me when there were parts of the highway that had traffic, because I'm going, it can't be that everybody in this line of traffic currently is using Apple Maps and is navigating to a place. So then Apple Maps knows that there's traffic in this part of the road. There's got to be some other thing that's going on here. And understanding now that these hubs that you talked about are one place where mapping companies pull that data from, so that even if a person isn't necessarily navigating, many newer cars have those built-in GPS units on in their car, and they are constantly, of course, keeping track of the location so that when you open it up, it can show you right where you are. And so that information can be given and then combined together, then you can start to show these areas of traffic. So that was an interesting clarifying point. But I think this is another situation that we regularly see, which is that technology, people get very excited and they want to improve things. So they add new technologies, they iterate, they go and make something amazing, like cars that can play songs from a satellite and all this other stuff. And then afterward is when the realization comes that they have to think about a person's privacy. It's like, in the moment, everything gets built on slowly, bit by bit. And it's not until afterward that we go, oh, right, something needs to change here. Because, when we first, I can remember a time on our phones where everyone did just hit okay to every permission thing that popped up. And it's only now that it's starting to be more of a situation where folks are going, actually, do I want to grant my permission to this? Do I want to let this app track me? And that we're now, after we've set the base, we're now finally saying, let's think about what we're doing here. And I think that the same applies here. All of these technologies individually were about improving the feel of the car, improving the experience of driving, making it easier to get from point A to point B. But then as these car companies and everyone else started going, oh, we can learn more about how people use their cars so that the next car can be better. And then suddenly there's this huge collection of data, and not having the ability to say, when I look at my car's dash and I turn it on for the first time, whether it's a used car or a brand new car, to have an option to say, no, I don't want this, where I would have to go into the car and find the fuse that's related to the cellular radio that's built into my car, or whatever it happens to be, in order to stop it from sending out that data. That's not good. And we do need to, like, this won't happen because this isn't how things work, but there should be a pause, like, hold it. Let's get this ironed out right away because this needs to change. And so instead, it requires articles like this being written and groups like Privacy for Cars being created and, all of this being brought to light to make a change. And that's not how it should work. We should have privacy as a fundamental right that should not be violated without our full consent. And it shouldn't be hidden consent, which says, when you buy this car and turn the ignition to on, you are consenting to have your data shared with all of these third parties. That's nonsense. And that's not how it should be.
Yeah. Privacy by default. Yeah. On a wide scale. I would agree with that. Yeah, and you are pointing to another actually point of this article, which is around user consent, right? Consent controls on our phones. We're used to seeing those things pop up that ask us, "Are you okay with this?" and whatever. And like you said, in the past, it was really easy to just be like, "Yeah, whatever, just get me to the thing." Now, at least for myself, I'm way more intentional with that. Sometimes I do, out of laziness, just skip through it. But sometimes, I focus on it because I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Why does this app need that? That sort of thing.
Exactly.
In cars, we don't really have the opportunity to do that. And I imagine in a lot of these situations, it's not like a pop-up appears on your odometer that says, hey, wait a minute. If you're going to be navigating over there, do you give us permission to do all these other things? And that's one of the things that the markup actually points out. As a driver, we might consent to the use of using navigation to locate where we're going and go to and from. But that doesn't necessarily automatically give consent that, yes, I'm navigating there and that data is transferred over to you and that data can then go to a data marketplace that blah, 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 blah. Like the consent is for this action. It's not for the whole picture. And there is no be. Yeah, it shouldn't be. Yeah, exactly. And there is no kind of like middle ground when it comes to vehicles because it's so unregulated, because we're just not used to seeing that as in the same way that we are on the smartphone. So anyways, great read for understanding how the data marketplace works for vehicles. And I highly recommend checking it out. And you can also, they have 37 companies that they've identified that are part of that market. And so you can kind of like read up about the companies and understand a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes. Educate yourself.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Themarkup.org.
Yeah, there we go. All right, coming up, Mikah is going to talk about the next net neutrality bill that's currently in the works, because it seems like to be like a little ping pong match. But anyways, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Collide. If you are listening to this podcast, which is true because you probably just heard me say that, the odds are good that at some point you're going to go through an audit like SOC 2 or ISO 27001. And when you do, you'll have to answer some very tough questions about endpoint security. Questions like, do all your company laptops have their disks encrypted? Does everyone have the company's password manager installed? Do you have a system in place to monitor and maintain compliance throughout your cross-platform fleet? Even if you happen to be confident the answer to all those questions is yes, the bigger question is, can you prove it to an auditor? No one loves, knowing that they're going to face an auditor and kind of go through that fun piece of business. If you're not quite sure how you'd go about proving compliance across your fleet of devices, then that's why you need Collide. Collide is an endpoint security tool for Mac, Windows, and Linux devices that does things MDMs can't and gives you the visibility you need to achieve and maintain compliance. Best of all, Collide doesn't resort to surveilling employees or locking down devices. Instead, it works with end users to resolve issues and then relies on their cooperation and their informed consent. Pretty awesome. You can meet your security goals and pass your audit without compromising on privacy. All you got to do is visit collide.com/TNW to find out how. And if you follow that link, they're going to hook you up with a goodie bag that does include a t-shirt. I know you've been wanting a new t-shirt. Here you go. And that's just for activating a free trial. And I'll spell it out for you. That's KOLIDE. Collide.com/TNW. Make sure and go there. That lets them know that you heard about it on Tech News Weekly. That gets you the goodie bag. That gets you your brand new t-shirt. So check it out, Collide.com/TNW. And we thank Collide for their support of Tech News Weekly. Mikah, I throw the ball over to you. It's in your court.
All right, I got it. So the story I'm talking about today is how, yes, we are trying to get back to some form of net neutrality after we've seen a ridiculous ping pong between having net neutrality and not having net neutrality. It's one of the situations where during the Obama administration, there was net neutrality via the FCC. And you may remember, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this story is because you may remember how I mentioned on this show that I was a little bit confused why the FCC didn't just push through, and now I can't remember exactly what the specific story was about, but there was something where I felt the FCC had the ability to say, hey, this needs to happen. And it is because of a sort of an exact break down the middle in the FCC commissioner, with Republicans tied with Democrats there in the FCC, which, again, in these agencies, that should not even be a thing, but alas, it is a thing. Makes no sense, but it is a thing, and it is how our system works for some reason. And so the FCC can't really do anything because Joe Biden's pick for the FCC commissioner still hasn't made it through our lawmakers. It's not allowed to, go and be the FCC commissioner. So things just stay stuck where they are. What happened was during the Obama administration, the net neutrality and broadband, the net neutrality policies came forth that said, look, we've got to have net neutrality, and we need to make sure that essentially broadband is being regulated like one of the other public utilities that we regulate. And then when the Trump administration took over, and by the way, the FCC commissioner for Trump was allowed to become the FCC commissioner, then those changes were rolled back. And now, because they won't let Joe Biden's FCC commissioner do their job, the way that things are being pushed through now is via the legislative branch. So the legislative branch is pushing through the Net Neutrality and Broadband Justice Act. And essentially what it would do is bring back those regulations that were put in place under the Obama administration with the FCC. The idea is that the FCC would once again have authority over broadband infrastructure. So internet service would be considered one of those public utilities like the other telecommunications services that are regulated. And it would mean that broadband companies like AT&T, Comcast, Verizon would have to play ball under net neutrality and an open internet. Now, it's unclear if, when, how this law will make it through the legislative branch. This would, of course, give the FCC the ability to have oversight not just on broadband, but also to work towards improving privacy with broadband services, and also managing fraudulent billing, which is a big thing. I mentioned for myself when I first moved here and got my internet set up, there was some random charge that the person said I needed. And then when I upgraded to like faster internet and made all of these changes that would have cost me more, it ended up costing me less, and whatever random charge the person had put on there was no longer there. And I never got clarification on what was going on there, and it could have been something that was required, but those quote unquote required charges that may not actually be required is one of the things that the FCC would focus on. What is unclear is how exactly this is going to go through. Of course, California has its own rules regarding net neutrality. And so right now it's kind of a state's decision where regulations in all 50 states may be how this is done if the FCC and the new rules don't get pushed through. And I didn't know this, but CNET said that it was just in April of this year that the broadband industry finally stopped their lawsuit against California's net neutrality law. And so finally gave up and said, well, California is going to have its net neutrality law and there's nothing we can do about it. And essentially what that does is it opens up all of the other states who can go forth and not have to worry about a lawsuit that could, get in the way potentially. So it's unclear yet if we will see a federal rule regarding net neutrality protections or if it's just going to continue to be the states. But in any case, I think what I wish would happen is that the FCC could just do what it was supposed to do and regulate these different areas that we definitely now consider public utilities and important public utilities, especially after the pandemic and during the pandemic, where we realized it's a necessity and everybody needs to be able to have an internet connection. And without it, it's hard to do. But one of the things that this would there's a lot that's involved in this bill, including some stuff dealing with manufacturing of chips here in the United States versus elsewhere. But one of the things that it would do is provide for better pay cuts to, or not pay cuts, but price cuts to folks who need help being able to pay for entry. Here it is. I was trying to find the exact thing. It would give the agency, quote, more authority to promote competition and would put the FCC on firm legal footing to modernize the Universal Service Fund programs, which help provide subsidies to poor Americans for phone service and broadband, and which also provide E-rate funding to schools and libraries to offer broadband service. So overall, it will result in more folks being able to have access to the internet and would help to make sure that there's competition, which I find incredibly important given the fact that there's only one sort of legitimate option for me where I am right now. There are, of course, a few other options, but the speeds are so ridiculously bad that it's not a real option. So
start with a C, end with a T.
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So anyway, I would love to see more competition for these. I guess technically it starts with an X and ends with a Y. Since
okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's how they like to call themselves. Like, oh no, we're not that other company that everyone does.
Right. Yeah, good point. Well, I'm happy to see this. I mean, this really has been. I mean, this has been going on since 2014, I believe. Right. I think that was when Wheeler first brought it forward. Maybe it was 2014 or 2015. I can't remember. But yeah, this has really been a ping pong battle back and forth. It just makes me wonder, like, okay, so here we are right now, with people in control of the White House that favor net neutrality. If we end up in a situation where that flip-flops, does the ping pong match continue? And I think the answer always there is yes. I would just love for this to be settled and finalized, because I agree. Unfettered internet access is important, and it's in my mind, that's a human right for everyone to have. Actually, and just real quick, because I saw this in the article today. There will be an AMA on the subreddit politics, actually in a couple hours. So I guess if you're watching this show live, it's at 2:30 p.m. Pacific, which is like 2.5 hours from now. But the majority of you, it will have already passed. But anyways, hopefully there will be some more information there Senator Markey, Wyden, and Matsui will be doing kind of like a virtual press conference to discuss the bill. So I'm sure there will be some insight shared there as well. But I want this to be settled, and it's about time at this point, man. We've been waiting for a very long time for this to be done.
Yeah, and here we thought it was done, and then it gets undone.
know. That's what I mean. That's why I have just like level of pessimism. I'm like, yeah, this is just going to be another one of those things. Just no matter who's. Way, but yeah, I know it's exhausting. I wish it could just be done. So we'll cross our fingers, and I'm sure we'll talk all about it as we find out the yeses and the nos, associated with it. So. There we go. All right, we have reached the end of this episode of Tech News Weekly. We do this show every Thursday. All you really have to remember is twit.tv/TNW. Because if you aren't already subscribed, that's where you can go to get subscribed, or your podcatcher of choice, of course. If you are subscribed, you don't really have to remember anything. Just open up your podcatcher Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, whenever it is that you normally enjoy Tech News Weekly, and boom, it's going to be there for you. They're just waiting for you to watch and listen.
And if you would like to get all of our shows ad-free, well, would you believe we've got a way for you to do that? Yes, it's called Club Twit. Twit.tv/Club Twit is where you go. For $7 a month or $84 a year, you can become a member of the club. And when you do, you get quite a few things. First of all, you get access to every single Twitch show with no ads. You get access to the Club Twit Plus bonus feed that has extra content you won't find anywhere else, including behind the scenes, before the show, after the show, all sorts of fun stuff in there, and access to the members-only Discord server, which is a place where you can go to chat with your fellow Club Twit members, and also those of us here at Twit. And that already is a pretty awesome get, but you can have even more than that. Yes, by joining Club Twit for $7 a month, you'll also get access to the Twit Plus club exclusives. I stopped there because there are more than two, and I was going to just say two. There's Hands on Mac, which is my show that covers all things Apple, all sorts of tips, tricks, etc., that will help you make the most of your Apple devices. I've got a show going out later today that's all about all of those fun apps inside of the utilities folder in your Mac's application folder, and Hands on Windows, which is Paul Thurrott's Windows program that covers the same kind of thing, tips and tricks for Windows users, and of course the Untitled Linux show, which is over on Club Twit. So if you would like to get all of those, again, $7 a month, $84 a year, and we also have single show plans if you're just interested in one of those two shows that I mentioned just then. You can also get access and help support the show with Apple Podcasts. You just launch the Apple Podcasts app on your phone, you type in Tech News Weekly, and you'll see the audio version of the show. Tap on that. There'll be a button to subscribe for $2.99 a month. You'll get an ad-free version of the audio feed right there in Apple Podcasts, and you can do the same with Hands on Mac and Hands on Windows. If you'd like to follow me online on pretty much every social media network, I'm at Mikah Sargent, or you can head to chihuahua.coffee, CHIHUAHUA.coffee, where I've got links to the places I'm most active online. You can catch me on Thursdays for this show, of course, and also Hands on Mac on Saturdays for the Tech Guy radio show, although I will be out this Saturday, and on Tuesdays for iOS Today, which I record with Rosemary Orchard, where we talk all things iOS, tvOS, watchOS, etc. Jason Howell, where can folks find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Jason Howell, and then you can find me doing All About Android every Tuesday, twit.tv/AAA, and other things sprinkled throughout the network when Leo is away occasionally, filling in for him. Actually, last Sunday, I had the honor of filling in for Leo on This Week in Tech. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was a blast. It was really cool. It was good to see Megan Maroney again, and Ashley Esqueta and Roberto Baldwin. So I had just a great panel with me. They're all great panels, but it was just a really easy drop in for Twit, and we had a blast. So if you haven't watched that or listened to that, check that out. Twit.tv/Twit will take you right there. As for at the TWiT studios, want to give a big thank you to John Ashley for doing all the post-show production as well as the live show production and helping us out. Also Burke for testing our guests and making sure the tech side of things are dialed in appropriately for the show. And always want to give a big thank you to you, viewer/listener, for just, checking out the show each and every week. Without you, we would have no one to do the show for. So we appreciate you coming back week after week. And we'll see you next time on Tech News Weekly. Bye, everybody.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I join with my co-host to bring you This Week in Space, the latest and greatest news from the final frontier. We talk to NASA chiefs, space scientists, engineers, educators, and artists, and sometimes we just shoot the breeze over what's hot and what's not in space, books, and TV. And we do it all for you, our fellow true believers. So whether you're an armchair adventurer or waiting for your turn to grab a slot in Elon's Mars rocket, join us on This Week in Space and be part of the greatest adventure of all time.